Hi, and welcome to this latest episode of the podcast series, Careers in Science. I'm your host, Sean Hughes, chemistry teacher at John Abbott College, and I started this podcast series to help shed some light on the many opportunities that await students, be they high school students, college students, or university students, that are looking to pursue jobs in STEM fields. Thinking of my own experience growing up, other than the usual suspect jobs, I wasn't quite sure what I could do with a science education, and so really I hope for you, the listener, that you can pull some ideas from this, hear a little bit about some of the jobs that are possible with STEM education, and hear a little bit too about some of the jobs out there that maybe you never even thought of before. Today's episode is particularly special because I've invited my brother-in-law, Mark Ajersch, to join us. Mark is a manager in the SR&ED department at the PSB Bois-Joli, which is actually an accounting firm. And the interesting thing here is that Mark's background is actually in engineering. He obtained his bachelor's in engineering from McGill University, went off into the workforce for a bit before returning back to McGill to complete his master's in engineering. Mark has an interesting story to share, and glad to have you here with us, Mark. Thanks for doing this.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Mark, I'm going to obviously owe you a favor for doing this. I don't know if it's going to entail something like mowing your lawn for the better part of a year or something else.
Well, I have a gardener, don't worry. I'll just ask you to take care of the children for an afternoon while I go play golf.
Mark, I'm going to jump right into it here. This podcast series is called Careers in Science, and inevitably, our careers always start in school. Was it always science for you?
I think so. As you all know, my dad is an engineer, professor of engineering at École Polytechnique, and he never pushed us to do science, but I think it was sort of an innate feeling that we had that it was something that would be interesting to us, at least to me. I can't speak for my sister, but for me, there was always an interest in and he fostered it. I always liked to read as a kid, and I definitely did enjoy doing little science experiments. I wasn't someone who would sit there with a chemistry set and try to make things explode in the living room. But I certainly saw some appeal in reading, learning about chemistry and science. There were always fun with science books around the house as a child. When we finally had an option to choose science in grade 11, I definitely picked that because I did enjoy chemistry a lot more than I did history or geography. The area that was interesting to me was more stuff that had to do with math. So I remember taking linear algebra, enriched linear algebra. I remember taking Cal 3. I remember taking, I think it's called astrophysics, but I took electronics. I wound up having to do, to get this enriched science certificate, which is something that I think Marianopolis only offered a little bit, but you had to do 7 of your 12 science courses had to be like enriched. I knew it wasn't going to be biology. So I knew Cal 3 would count. I knew certain other classes counted. I wound up doing an extra credit project for Chem 201 or something, and that was something. It was like the teacher basically made me research something, and I wrote a paper on it. But like that was something where I was like, okay, this is interesting. Like going down the path of science is something that I think I could see myself doing.
So clearly in CEGEP, you gravitated more towards the math courses. It was something that you enjoyed a lot. However, as you started moving off into university, you started to gravitate more towards engineering, which is more of a field renowned for applicability or practicality. What was it that changed for you?
Second year CEGEP, I was part of the Marianopolis robotics team. And it was like, oh, okay, this is something like working on a team, working together, building something that is, it was really cool. It was really fun. And I was like, okay, this is something that's really interesting. And the teacher we had at the time was a good dude. Like, he was a very interesting guy, made the class interesting. Lots of people really liked him. He was a really nice man and really seemed to care. A quick anecdote, I remember he held a contest to drop an egg from like the second floor of a building. My friend built this contraption to basically house his egg. And I think you had limited materials, like some sticks, some rubber bands. And so he built this crazy thing that was like a huge surface area so that it would land on the ground and always land that side down. So it was weighted that way. And the egg was sitting in like a cradle held with elastic bands so that when it hit the ground, the elastic bands would stretch and the egg would just stay, like sort of like a shock absorber kind of. And Sean, you're laughing, so you know where this is going, right? Yeah. So anyway, so he makes this thing and like he basically successfully dropped his egg. It landed perfectly. And other people were making stuff like that would house the egg, like sort of a a crumple zone in a car kind of thing. Like it would just crash. But he built this really fancy thing with a cradle, and it works beautifully, except he forgot to put a cover on it. So when it hit the ground, the egg fell down and launched right out of the cradle and hit the ground and broke.
So I'm laughing so much because we had a project back in high school where I think it was for ethics course that we were taking, and we had to basically be father to an egg and walk around with this egg and take care of it, try not to kill it. And I can't remember who it was exactly, but somebody came in with like a contraption almost exactly as you described, with the elastic bands. I remember looking at it and thinking, I don't know if this is going to work.
That's like these sort of little, you know, they're not silly, but they're important to when you're 17 and sort of learning science. But these sort of contests and things like that, where you tend to like, oh, I'm going to try this. And I'm looking forward to it. My kids are now 8 and 6, and I'm looking forward to when they have to do something like that for their science class. And they're going to be like, oh, how am I going to do this?
It's funny you say that, because one of the things we struggle with in science education in general is teaching kids that it's okay to fail, that you can screw up, but you could iterate, you could redesign and try again. I mean, we don't want you to fail at the end, but
you talk about my job, we'll get into that.
There you go.
That's exactly basically the story I have to tell with every project that I write for my clients. So I don't really care if your project succeeded and you made $1 trillion from it. I want to know, when the government wants to know, why it was hard. And the way you show that it's hard is, where did you fail? Where did you screw up? How did you change your idea based on how you screwed up? But we'll get into that in a few minutes.
There you go.
And quite frankly, if my clients didn't have any failures along the way, they wouldn't be eligible for the credits. You know what I mean? So that's sort of, we're literally illustrating the scientific method while we're writing these projects up.
What kind of challenges did you face in school?
It was really in third semester and fourth semester at McGill, so second year, where I kind of hit the wall, where I realized what I'd been doing up to that point was not going to be good enough. I got some very poor marks in some midterms, which I'd never gotten before, and I was like, hold on a second, this is serious now. I didn't want to have to redo any classes, so I basically decided to live at the library at McGill. So it turned into a grind, and like I struggled through those classes.
So what was your first job?
Basically hired right out of school, and I moved down to Boston. The job was relatively interesting. I worked for a big multinational company called Teradyne. They make test equipment. Companies that make computer chips would buy these testers and test hundreds of their chips at the same time on an assembly line to see if they were pass muster, so they could get put into cell phones or refrigerators or whatever. And these were big machines. And I was put on a project, which was very interesting at the time. It was these chips had a bunch of pins to test, and they were going. The generation of test equipment that I was parachuted into in the project was basically 3 times as big as the one they had done. So they needed a way to cool all that electricity. So they designed a system that used water bags to cool down the boards. So you're talking like 480 volts with deionized water. My job specifically was to run the SMC, which was the controller that safely brought up the system so that you could power it on and run all the checks. And like, it was pretty involved. Like to get it running was pretty involved. I wound up writing a 40-page like how-to documents and troubleshooting and this and that. That was like my big project for the first year. I made a friend there, my friend Jonathan. And I wound up in his group, not directly under him, but in his group, and he saw me. He's like, this is a smart kid. So he helped me. He's like, this gave me a few pointers about the working world. It's like, it doesn't really matter that you don't really know anything yet, because the first thing that you learn when you go from being in school to being in a corporate job is like, you really don't know anything. You have to be willing to ask questions. Well, ask questions is the first thing. It's like, okay, I have to do this. Okay, I don't know how to do this. How to do this? And then you get to ask that once. If you have to ask that a second time, then you're going to start. You know, people are gonna notice. But you can ask it once, no problem. But you have to remember to not be proud and ask it once, because people are also going to notice if you're struggling and you don't know how to do something that you said you know how to do. So like, don't be afraid to work hard learn fast, and be there, like, and absorb what you can. So that's what my friend Jonathan taught me in my first year of working. He said, this is what you need to be doing. The main issue that I had with being at that big company was that I was working on a project where I was the point person in Boston for solving problems while the guys on the test floor, so the technicians, were building the systems up so that they could be tested and shipped to the clients. These things took like weeks to build and test, like they're enormous machines. The design team was in San Jose. So I come in at 8:30 or whatever, 9 o'clock, and the guys have questions for me, and I'm like, it's 6 a.m. there. I can't call them and wake them up and ask them your question. So like till 11, I was like kind of twiddling my thumbs, trying to figure things out on my own, figuring things out as you go, asking questions here and there. And then at 11, I'd be like, okay, guys, here's my list of questions for the day. Please answer them. And I made some good friends with the guys in San Jose, so they would send me information. But I wound up, this is probably where I made my bones that first year, is I wound up staying every day until like 8 o'clock. I was new to Boston. I didn't have anywhere else to go. I only knew my friends at work. So, I'll just stay here and work, So I did. But I was able to gain a lot of knowledge because the guys were 3 hours behind me, and I was there and could ask them questions while they were there. So the first shift workers really got screwed because they came in at 7:30 and they were done at 3:30, and I didn't have answers for them until like 11:30 every day. But the second shift guys got their answers right away. So they started at 3:30 and they were out till 11:30 or whatever, but they had answers until 8 p.m. So they would leave the system for the next shift guys to come in. So that was part of it. I was like, man, this is great, but it really sucks that I have to wait 3 hours, and I came in late on this project. And then I got moved on to the next project as you do in an engineering job. And this one, the design team for the security system was in Germany. So instead of having to wait till 11 for my San Jose surfer engineers to show up and give me answers, I have like irate Germans leaving me messages at 7 a.m. So anyway, I was like, at that point, I was like, okay, corporate engineering is fine, but it's really not for me. I'm like, I don't want to do this. I want to be able to talk to the person that I am by phone, but like, I don't want to travel time zones. I don't want to have to do this and that. So I was like, at that point, I was like, you know what, this is Boston experience has been fun. I had been there for almost 2 years at that point. And I decided to go back up to, McGill. I got in touch with the professor with whom in control engineering I had done the big research project. I talked to him and I said, listen, can I come back and do a master's? I really did enjoy that project lab with you. He's like, yeah, come on back.
Yeah.
He said, anyway, the first year you're doing courses anyway, basically, and you'll start your project basically in May of the second year when you finish. And you'll have however long it takes you to finish that. I'm like, that sounds great. And then I started school in September, and master's in control and engineering was something that was really cool to me. I had a great time.
So then what prompted the jump to go start your master's?
General disillusionment with the big company experience. I think part of it stems from, like, I'm not a designer. And I think in that second project, there was more design emphasis on me. And I was like, you learn as you go. And this is something I want to bring up. I felt that this was a point that I really wanted to make with this whole thing, this whole conversation around me, is like, you have to try a bunch of things before A, you learn what you're good at, and more importantly, B, what you don't like doing. And that's the biggest lesson I can offer in this whole conversation, is like, if you don't like doing something, don't do it. Find a way to do something that you like to do. That sounds trite and cliched, but it's quite true.
Oh, absolutely. It sounds 100% true. This is a theme that's materialized throughout this podcast series.
I think every stop along the way until I landed in my current job, I learned something that I didn't want to do. I learned with that first stop, I don't want to be in a big multinational engineering firm anymore. I don't have aspirations to become the CEO of a company of 7,000 people, or even the head of a department where I'm running things in 3 different cities. That's not for me, So I learned that quickly. I came back to school. I'm like, all right, this is great. I'm going to focus on really the science that I want to focus on. I had a great time doing my master's. I had a great supervisor, a great bunch of people working on similar projects. It was in an area that I knew next to nothing about. The control and automation bit aside, my specific project was in something really different. Like, Benoit, my supervisor, Benoit Boulet at McGill, he was designing controllers for their chemical forming machines. So basically taking an electrical engineering approach to solving a chemical engineering problem. My specific project was on building a controller that would control the temperature of a plastic sheet in a thermoforming machine. So thermoforming is the process by which yogurt cups are made. So you have a little thin plastic sheet. It goes into an oven with heaters on the top and the bottom. It melts the plastic somewhat. It comes out and it gets pressed into a form. And then presto, you have 24 yogurt cups. So the sheets for yogurt cups are pretty thin, but you can make big stuff out of it too, like gas tanks for cars.
Oh, cool.
So what's important in a gas tank for a car is you have different edges that need to be thick in the corner, because that's like roadside stuff. You have the car has to be safe. Like you can't have the gas tank leaking and exploding, and like it's got to be a minimum thickness everywhere. So in certain spots, like based on the design of the car, the gas tank itself has a weird shape. So it's got to have it's going to have corners where the plastic gets thinner when you press it into the mold. So in that specific spot, you need to have a more molten plastic so that it stretches better and then freezes, and then it doesn't freeze, but it hardens again in the new shape. So the controller we designed as a team basically broke the sheet into zones and used sensors in the oven to measure the temperature of the sheet. And based on the temperature it was reading, would change the temperature of the heater zones so that it would put more heat in the areas where it needed to and less heat in the areas where it didn't need to. Pretty complex multivariable controller. The current standard of technology, and now this is 15 years ago, so it may have changed, but at the time, they put the sheet in to the thermoformer, make sure all the doors were closed in the factory so that the air temperature stayed the same, heat it for like 40 seconds, look at it. They wouldn't measure the temperature of the sheet, they'd measure the temperature of the zones, take it out, press it. Hey, it's good. All right. Like it was really rudimentary. So we were really adding a lot in terms of precision. So the first 10 sheets every day were thrown away because the oven was heating up and it wasn't getting to a sort of a stable air environment. The conduction and the convection were not happening properly. And our system, we modeled everything and we had the whole thing under control. We had modeled the plastic and everything like that. And so we put it in and we have our sensors measuring, and we built, so I wrote my thesis. I remember getting compliments from the other professor who reviewed the thesis. He wrote in and he said, Benoit, this is really good. I think this is something that every student should do, is to figure out a financial application of what their project is doing. I had written a whole section on this is what it could be used for. This is, because in the back of my mind, I was like, we are going to take this and we are going to take off with it, and we are going to upgrade all the thermoformers in North America with our new sensor technology and be able to, boom, sell it to a bunch of car companies and make $1 bajillion. Like that was the idea. And with that idea, we went and got a grant after I finished, my friend and I, we got a grant for like $100K to pay ourselves a small stipend as research assistants, but to build our prototype and go around and do, we got an NSERC grant, and NSERC grant, sorry.
NSERC, yeah.
So, it was pretty cutting edge at the time. So we were pretty thrilled about that. That's when I realized that running a startup is extremely stressful. Even if it was just the two of us and my friend was willing to put up with it more than me, any day when the research didn't go well, I was like, oh my God, this is a lot of pressure,
Yeah, I can imagine. No kidding. Because you've got a lot riding on this.
No, it was my livelihood. It was a great idea, and I think it's still. I don't know if it's in use currently in the different car companies. We did build a prototype, and we did take it to a trade show in the U.S., and we did get really good feedback on it. So I think we could have pushed it forward for sure. It was an excellent engineering project and an excellent solution. It just, at the time, in stress-free. I had to sit down in the cafeteria at the IMI and talk to my friend and say, I can't do this. And he was like, look, this is totally fine. I know this isn't the risk you want to be taking right now. So that was when I was like, okay, big company, not for me. Startup, not for me. What am I going to do now?
So this is pretty much how you ended up at PSB Boiserie.
And as you're looking at engineering jobs, I'm like, this is cool. Like, then I saw a job offer. I was like, RS&DE consultants. I'm like, what is that? Or SR&ED consultant. RSDE is in French. Scientific research and experimental development consultant. What is that? Must have a technical background. Must be able to write in English and French. I'm like, I can do both of those things. But it wasn't for PSB. It was for a different place. So I fired off a job application to that place, and they never responded. I'm like, okay, that's too bad. So, I go through the year. I'm looking for jobs here and there. I've done this small freelance thing for my friend that took about a month. And then, I see another job posting, similar SR&ED consulting, and I look at who's offering it. I said, PSB. PSB. I know PSB. The S is my friend Matt's dad, Mr. Snarch. He was my scoutmaster when I was like 10 years old.
Yeah.
So some random occurrence later, like me and a friend, Matt, and a friend of his, a friend of ours, were playing tennis. And I asked him, Matt, can you send me your dad's email? I think I could be working at his place. They have a position that I think I'd be really well suited for. He's like, but you're an engineer. He's an accountant. What? I don't get it. I'm like, yeah, well, they're asking for something called a research and development consultant. I'm like, I think it's something I can do. It's like, really? Sure, I'll send you his email. So I wrote a nice cover letter, and I sent him the email, and attached my CV, and he forwarded to my current boss, Patrick, and Patrick interviewed me. They sent me an email back saying, we'd love to meet you. Of course, I happened to be in Florence on my honeymoon when they sent the email. Long story short, a little after Halloween, I had my interview, and I was hired 2 weeks later. So that's how an engineer winds up working at an accounting firm.
So what is SR&ED?
SR&ED, so it's a tax credit program for companies. Companies can get money for certain activities, whether it's developing a new product or improving a process or whatever it is that meets the government's criteria for eligibility. So my job is to go and talk to my clients about what they did in the last fiscal period. We'll talk about what they did, and we'll see if there are any projects that they worked on that qualify. Basically, they have to show that they're advancing technology and that there's a technological uncertainty, which means that you might have a great idea, but if you can find an easily Googleable answer, the government can do it too, and they're going to say, well, that's not really advancing technology. You just did the same Google search I did and found the answer. And that they did systematic approach to the work. And this circles back to our conversation before about screwing up and failing. So this is where the company tries things, and they get not necessarily rewarded because they spent the time and did the work and had all the failures, but they do get compensated for having done all that work. So that's what I do. I go, I interview people just like you're interviewing me. I will sit there and we'll talk about what they did during the years. I work on all kinds of things. Food. The current one I'm working on is a company that makes frozen pizzas. There's another one that works on cancer research drugs. There's another one that works on a couple that work in cancer stem cell research drugs. I have another one that works in he makes organic compounds for various labs in the city and other clients outside of the city. It's an evolving job. I definitely have learned a lot of skills, but I wouldn't say I do any engineering work anymore.
What is it about your STEM education background that lends well to the diverse products that you come across on a day-to-day basis, things that you have to evaluate the science for that maybe you don't have the specialty in?
Well, I'm fond of saying this. McGill taught you how to think, and it taught you how to work hard. And I think every school, no matter where it is, I say McGill, but it could be Concordia, it could be John Abbott, it could be wherever you go where they're training you to do your job. You learn how to think critically, and you learn how to apply your knowledge to the specific situation. So all I'm really doing with each project is taking the government's 3 rules and figuring out how each project fits. Some of them don't, but every day, as long as you come at the project with the correct approach. What is the current state of technology or science? How are you surpassing that? Why was it hard to do? And what did you do? You can apply it to anything. I don't have to be a chemist to be able to explain the guy's chemical compound projects. I don't have to be a food scientist to explain why the frozen pizza or the pizzas, when they go through the production line, don't work. I mean, like I wrote one in the winter about bacteria growing on croissants. I don't know much about that stuff, but like I learned about it and I wrote about it. So, and the project is pretty strong because they definitely have uncertainty. They were trying to prevent bacteria growth by putting UV light on the croissants and hitting the croissant bag from all different angles so that it can sit on the shelf for 6 weeks or something.
What do you like most about your current job?
What I like about my current job is I always found myself very stressed when I was the person who had to do the design, or it was on me, But here I get to apply my strengths, which is writing and explaining and translating basically what the client is saying into what the government wants to hear. Those are all things that I'm very good at. I'm not so good at solving the problem, as I learned at Maggi, because I got too stressed when I tried to do it, or at the bigger company when, again, I was put in a scenario where there was a lot riding on my design skills, and I was like, whoa, I don't know if I can do this. So I wound up finding somewhere that I was more comfortable and worked with that. So now, like, these files are hundreds of thousands of dollars, but I'm completely confident in my ability to pull them off. Whereas if I was designing the actual solution and had that pressure on my shoulders, I'm not sure I could do it. So it took a while to sort of figure out where I was comfortable with that level of risk.
So who would be an ideal person for this job? What kind of personalities should they have? What kind of skill set should they bring to the table?
Who can understand the scientific method? What I always ask my clients to answer when I meet them for the first time, I explain the program, the 3 criteria, and some of it goes right over their heads, which is fine. Like it's very jargony and lots of words and stuff like that. And I just tell them this way: 4 questions. What were you trying to do? What's the normal way to do that? Why can't you do it that way, or why don't you want to do it that way? Usually it's too expensive. That's usually the answer. What did you propose? So that's your hypothesis. What did you propose, the scientific method? And then what did you do? And then, did it work? If not, what'd you do? Did it work? If not, what'd you do? Did it work? And then we repeat until either we hit the end of the year or the answer.
Right.
So that's how we sort of show that it takes those 3 mysterious questions and translates it to something people want to hear. And I think if you have the ability to understand quickly what people are doing, no matter what industry they're in, like I'm not a chemist, so I can parlez-vous a bit with chemistry because I've met quite a few chemists and I know what they're doing and this and that. You just remember, you just have to answer those 3 questions. And if they're complicated questions, the government person will be asking their scientist, not you specifically to answer them. So long as you can quickly grasp what they're telling you and place it in the specific format that the tax forms require you to put it in, answering those 3 questions, you can be efficient and good at this job.
Okay, this has been pretty awesome. I think you've got a really interesting story here that you've shared about all the ups and downs you've had in school, starting work, trying out new jobs. And I think the big overall message that I take from this is how important it is to do exactly what you suggested, that you've got to go out and try things and put yourself out there to see what it is you like and what it is you don't like. And this is a theme that we've heard through many of the podcasts, people suggesting to students who might be listening, hey, go out and explore and see what works for you and do something that you love, because that's where you're going to draw your satisfaction from in your profession. I mean, you can hear it in your voice, you can hear it when you describe your current work, that this is what you really enjoy doing, this is what you like to do. And I think back to my previous interview with Dr. Vetroni, who said, if you really enjoy what you're doing, what you do doesn't feel like work. And I hope that listeners really take that advice to heart.
Yeah, one thing that, like, I worked at my current job for a lot of years. And over the years, I made a bunch of friends who are accountants. And accountants they're not as dull as everybody makes them out to be. I'll just say that. They're fun. Sure, they're focused on numbers and things like that, but they have the same challenges as everybody else. And our place is a good sort of learning place for young auditors and things like that to do their thing. But I see a lot of me at Teradyne in them, whereas they work hard, they do the internship, and then they wind up being placed at this job. That is a lot of fun. Like the people there are really good and this and that, and then they just sort of learn after 2 years that, well, doing this grind thing and seeing the same clients every year, it's not for me. And then they wind up going off and doing private industry stuff here and there. But often on the way to making that decision, they come, and I've made friends with them, so they come and talk to me about this. And like, I'm not an accountant. I see them after 2 years making the decision that I did 15 years ago at Teradyne. I'm like, this is nice and all, but it's not what I want to be doing. And I tell them the same thing. I said, you gotta learn what you don't like before you can do what you like. And you have to put in that time. You can't skip that step. You gotta do that entry level job. You can't just jump to like, I want to be a manager with 15 people under me. And you have to learn how to do that job. You can't just start at the top.
Yeah.
Like you have to, but doing those jobs, whatever it is, wherever you start out, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this and see where it takes me. If I like it, then great. My friend Jason liked it. This year, he finally became a partner. Like 15 years of hard work got him there, and I'm super proud of him and happy for him because that's what he wanted. But the people under him didn't want the same thing, and they wanted to try, let's go to private industry, let's go work for a company, let's go be a controller, let's go do this. So like, I've got the approach from the engineering side and I've got the approach from the accounting side, and it's very similar no matter where you are. You gotta sort of learn what you don't like before you can figure out what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this, Mark. Let's talk again soon.
No problem.
And so concludes this episode of the podcast series Careers in Science. I've been your host, Sean Hughes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like and subscribe to the page. And if you have suggestions for any other careers you'd like to see profiled in this series, be sure to leave a comment. Thank you for listening, and bye for now.